So welcome everybody. It's good to see you. It's good to be together and breathe together and enter into sacred space together at this time, which is always now. We'll be entering into this discussion about what's called the ecological self. So of course, that asks us to question, what do we mean by the self? What is the self? And that's really the fundamental question of or intention of spiritual work, which is, who am I? To really open to and discover the true nature of our being, and of course then to be that. So that's where the idea of cultivating and embodying a sense of that presence is involved. And I wanted to talk a little bit about what we mean by an ecological self. You know that in this webinar, those of you that have been here before, I spend a lot of time talking about intention and how important intention is in terms of what we experience. And we've used the formula that intention, if we cultivate a conscious intention, if we clarify what it is we're intending, then that will focus our attention. Our attention will aim at whatever it is, or towards whatever it is we're setting as an intention. And then that's what we'll tend to experience. That's what we'll tend to be aware of. So if we intend to heal a particular area of our body, then we're going to pay attention to that area of our body, and whatever it is that is medicine or healing for that wound or hurt, and then that's pretty much what we'll experience. We'll experience the wound healing. Hopefully it will be healing. And so the intention that I want to call attention to, for us to consider, is the intention to cultivate an ecological self. And so I want to talk a little bit about what that means. To give a sense of the significance of this, I want to quote a very short sentence from Thomas Berry. Father Thomas Berry was a priest. He was in one of the writings that I saw about him, it said he is a scholar and a passionate priest who called himself a geologian. You've all heard of theologians, and he was, of course, he could have called himself a theologian. He was a priest and studied religious thought, but he called himself a geologian. So you get a sense of where he's coming from when he says that, I'm a geologian. And he said It's time to reinvent the human. Reinvent the human if we hope to save our planetary home. And you could also say if we hope to save ourselves, because we are not going to be doing very well if our planetary home isn't doing very well. And so, yeah, what does it mean to reinvent the human in a way that means we're going to be transforming or shifting our sense of what we are, of our nature, of ourself. So let me just share something about self. If I can do this. We always have a little trickiness about this. There we go. Okay. So we have what we ordinarily think of as ourself, almost everybody. So what is that? We could say, who, in other words, who, when somebody says, who are you? Who am I? What is it that you're thinking of? Or when you ask yourself, who am I? You know, in a very ordinary sense. Very often people really identify with their body. This is who I am. My body is, I'm sitting, I'm standing, I'm sleeping. That's my body doing that. Another worry we think of our ordinary self is it's our personality. It's all the things we've come to think and feel and how we respond, how we react. To whatever extent we know what that is, that's the personality. Some people refer to this, what I'm talking about right now, as the small self in comparison to what we'll talk about next. You can see down there the higher self or the bigger self. The personal self, the egoic self. Ego has, as a word, has a little bit of a bad connotation for a lot of people. I don't think of it that way. It's just the personal self. It's the ordinary mind. And it's who you think you are 99% of the time, unless you happen to be in a very, very clear kind of awakening kind of place where maybe you're in touch with the fact that you are not that. You are not actually that body, personality, personal self, egoic self. You're a being that you could call a higher self. And again, these are just words, but they're words that point to something that people experience as reality. So that also could be called the soul, the true self, the true nature, your true nature, the spiritual self. Jungians say the self with a capital S, and they refer to the other self with a small s. I call it the big ass self, big S self, sorry. And then there's presence. Some people just like to use the word presence. So there's the small self. Let me get somebody in here. And then there's the higher self or the true self. Of course, in other spiritual traditions, in many spiritual traditions, there's different words for what I'm talking about here in different languages. But Hebrew, I believe you could say this higher self could be called the neshama. In the Hindu tradition, it's the Atman. But I think you all have some sense of what I mean, and I'm just kind of running it out here as a startup for what we're talking about. Now, psychologists have, some psychology theories and groups have come up with the term relational self. And by that, they mean that what it is that we think we are is always defined in terms of some kind of relationship. I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a mother or a daughter or a friend. And that sense of myself is who I am. And to me and to other people. And that relational self can be different in different contexts. So it's a contextual sense of the self. It's always involved somehow in a relational situation. And I think what we can ask is are we in any sense ever separate from these relationships, or are we always embedded in some web of living connectedness with others, perhaps all beings? And that begins to open us to the idea that we could expand the sense of self, even the sense of what it is that we are in relationship, to a larger and larger sphere of reality. So let me stop this little share there. Again, welcome to all those of you who came in a few minutes after we started. Just stay muted for now, if you would. And so I want to look at what are these relationships that define us? You know, what is there besides the fact that by meditating or doing spiritual work, it's possible that we can begin to feel this sense of higher self, the sense of soul, and how that relates to the small self, the personal self, and that kind of work. But if we start looking at a relational sense of who we are, what is that? Where is it that we're so connected that it defines who we are? And of course, the psychologists who talk about relational self primarily are talking about our relations with human beings, primarily the relationships that we have with human beings that are close to us, our mothers and our fathers and our other members of our family, our friendships, colleagues, and so forth, that tend to make up the exchange of thought, feeling, sensation that defines who we are. But what if we expanded that just at the human connectedness to a sense of our relations with the whole human family? If that helps to define our identity, that's a very big shift in consciousness. Many people have a sense of identity that goes beyond the personness or their family to a tribe, to an ethnic group or a tribe, and that then you know that when that particular group is attacked or things are said about it in a negative way, that person feels as if they've been hurt or wounded by those words or that attack. You probably have some group like that yourself, perhaps. One of the things I want to get into in a later webinar is the notion of political tribes and how in this country and in many parts of the world right now, people are divided into these warring tribal identities, and there's really no listening to the thoughts of people on the other side of that boundary. So the key element of that, though, that I'm focusing on today is identity. How it is that the I that I am can feel good or feel bad, depending on something that's happening to this larger grouping that I'm part of. So what if we expand that to all of humanity? I knew somebody a long time ago who was going around and promoting the idea of being a planetary citizen. I think his name, I can't remember his name. He became a friend of mine, but it was a long time ago and I forget. And so would it be like for a human being to feel that instead of their identity is their ethnic group or their nation, even, that they were part of the whole human family. And that when there was a wounding to the human family or there's suffering in the human family, they felt it. And they felt, therefore, just like you would if you hurt your finger, you'd want to help your finger. If something was hurting in a human being or a group of people, even at a great distance, you would feel it and you would want to help out. You would want to do something that would be supportive or helpful to those people. Now, what if we expanded beyond humans? A lot has been said in this framework of thinking about cultivating the ecological self, that we live in a world that's anthropocentric, meaning that the human being is the central focus of what we think of as valuable, and that all other aspects of the creation are essentially secondary or even just objects to be used for our benefit. That the human is the crown of creation, is a phrase that's often used, and that nature and the beings that we think of as part of nature as separate from humans, as if that were the case, are less than and less important than. And so what if we were to consider the expansion of our sense of identity, sense of relatedness, relational identity, to the animal world? And people who have particular animals that they are very close to, we call them pets, which is unfortunate in a way. I like to think of them as friends, creature friends. And if we even just make that little shift in language use, it helps us to realize that they're part of our world. They're part of what is us, even, and but if we go beyond just the one or two animals that we happen to know and love and care about and show affection to, and we recognize that the animal world, the animal realm, was a part of us, or somehow a part of our relational identity, and that would significantly affect many things about what we do, what we'd wear, what we'd eat, how we would go about those things. What if the plant world were part of this expanded sense of what it is that we identify as the living web that we're a part of? The trees and the shrubs and the flowers and grasses and so on. And going a little further, what if the mountains and the stones and the rivers and the creeks were part of our sense of what it is that we're identified with in our relational identity? See, that you can see where that begins to look like what could be called an ecological self, a sense of a self that's so expanded that it includes all of Mother Earth and all of the creatures on it. And what would happen then? What would happen to the way we would live? And what would happen if more and more people were to live that way, in terms of how we would organize ourselves, how we would relate to the land, relate to the economy of things, and so forth. So a lot of this, I mean, all of this right now, at least, I'm just saying out loud, and of course there are thoughts. The fact that we meditated for a few minutes at the very, very beginning, listening to that Native American flute and music, may have put you in a more experiential mode, but it would take an intention really to take these ideas of such an expanded self and bring it into where it actually was an experience. It actually was something that we felt really deeply and we really felt in our body. We really embody, as I said, embody it. So again, I want to read something else from a woman who I really appreciate her writing. I've been getting it through an email list that she posts on. Her name is Janine Marie Haugen, and she works with something called the Animus Valley Institute. A good friend of mine, Bill Plotkin, founded the Animus Valley Institute, I guess, several decades ago, uh, primarily doing earth-based rituals with people, quests into the wilderness, where people seek vision and healing for themselves by immersing themselves in nature, usually in solitude, so that they are only immersed in nature and not listening to cell phones or televisions or radios or even other human beings talking, so it's a different language that they're starting to open to in that context. And so this woman is a guide for some of those kinds of experiences and has been a long time, you could say, practitioner of this new way of being more the ecological self. Um, there's probably a less scientific sounding word for that might come up somehow in some of you, but I'm using that right now, ecological self, because it's very meaningful too. Here's one of the things that she wrote recently. She says, in decades of deliberate wandering, and as a guide to the mysteries of nature and psyche, I've experienced and witnessed how certain earth practices, such as sustained praise or wonder, or purposefully engaging with wilder others, as if everyone is alive, intelligent, participatory, and aware of us, that doing that can disturb our accustomed, entrenched, everyday psychic filters and habits, destabilizing us enough that at times a veil might be lifted, a veil that separates us from the psychic field that includes all of these others, suffused with their own wild dreams, relationships, longings, memories. You understand from hearing it this way that what she's getting at, that she's working with practices that she calls things like sustained praise and wonder, or wonder, in relationship, being out in nature herself and being amongst these other beings and recognizing them as intelligent, recognizing them as having a subjective life, an awareness themselves, and they can be aware of her and she of them and begin a process of communication. But this kind of sensitivity, this kind of awareness only happens when we sort of cultivate it, when we sort of enter into nature in such a respectful way, such a listening way, that we can have that kind of an experience. These are practices that require deep and deliberate attention, noticing when ordinary mind overtakes us, and refocusing on, for example, continuous praise of the others in their specific, glorious expressions. These practices can engender an expanded awareness that might open or approach mystical vision, a revelation of soul, or even an evolution of consciousness. So she's speaking very, very directly about this altering of consciousness that allows us to feel and know the um, reality of the consciousness in the other aspects of, or the other beings, really, that we encounter in the natural world. The trees, the shrubs, the squirrels, or the ants, or the buffalo, or bighorn sheep, or whatever it is, wherever one happens to be. And I have to say that although I'm a very, very, as I think you know, big proponent of meditation, and meditation that can be done in one's own home, is sitting on a cushion, sitting on a chair, lying down, however you do it. Um, I really do believe that the only way to have this particular shift of where we're aware of the our part in the ecology that's all around is to actually be in the natural world. We have to go out. We have to get out of the car, out of the house, out of off our pillow, and spend time out there under the sky, where there's real earth under our feet, and all of that life is all around us. It's almost like trying to have a relationship with somebody that that isn't there. That you could do it in your mind. You could try to open to a person in your own mind, but unless you really, at least on a Zoom call, but you hopefully will get to where we can actually meet each other live, and be in each other's presence, and talk to each other. And that's the way to really affirm that person's there, that person's really, really there, and they have a heart, and they have feelings, and just like you do. And that's what ecological consciousness allows us to feel about a forest, and or about a desert, or about the ocean, or about a river, or about an animal that one sees. That they're not only alive in some sort of scientific sense of being an organic being, but they actually have intelligence and consciousness, and have a relationship with us, and can communicate with us. Um, so I wanted also to say a little bit about the history of this term, ecological self. A philosopher, Norwegian philosopher, Arne Naess, I think you say his name, Naess, or Naas, Arne Naas, in talking about this, the psychological process that we call self-actualization, the growth from uh, of our smaller self to our more expanded, higher sense of being, that he would say that at some point in that growth, we shift from the sense of an individuated personal self to an ecological self. And so I believe he was the one who first coined that term. And then a lot of people kind of really resonated to it and see it as the next stage, in a way, of the work that needs to be done on the planet in terms of our evolution. That unless more and more people can cultivate this sense of themselves, we're not going to be able to repair the damage and stop the increasing damage that's being done to the planet. Part of the reason for that, you could say, is almost strategic. That is, that the environmental movement has counted for a long time on a kind of sense of asking people to be altruistic, to be generous, to say, okay, we have to do this because it's good take care of nature. But if instead you had that sense of identity, you wouldn't be doing it because it's the right thing to do or the good thing to do. You'd be doing it because it's what you do for yourself. It's what you do when you, like I say, when you hurt your hand, you want to fix your hand. If nature is hurting, if people are hurting, if animals are hurting, you want to do that because it's part of what you are, part of your being. And so the motivation to act, as we could say, environmentally conscious would be stronger in that sense, and more automatic. Just sort of part of what any organism does is want to take care of itself. We can talk about that if people, but see, the idea is you're shifting from asking people to do something because they ought to do something, that not even asking them to do it. You're just asking them to be awake to what is, to who they are, and then they'll naturally act in accord with what needs to be done, if they're given the right information, of course, too. I want to just ask a question here. The ecological self, this idea, has, as far as I can tell, two streams of thought that go with it. And I have a sort of a favored one myself, but I think both of them are movements toward a healthier, more expanded view of who we are, and therefore will lead to better behavior in that sense. One way of thinking about it that probably makes the most sense to people is that as you expand in this way, you're aware of your relatedness. You're aware of your relationships to these other beings, animals, trees, if you want to recognize them as beings, mountains, and so forth. That sense of relatedness, just like you have a relationship with another person, is a very powerful thing. And if you have that a sense of awareness that you are in that relationship, you naturally feel that sense of wanting to serve, wanting to be in a healthy relationship with whoever that is. The other way of looking at ecological self, when we say it that way, is kind of a more spiritual, mystical sense of things, that you can arrive at a state of consciousness in which all of what we are experiencing is a reality that ultimately is you. That there is the sense of being that is not only related to everything, but is in union with all that is. And that's a state of consciousness that comes from a lot of deep spiritual work. Or it is deep spiritual work, but I mean of a different kind than meditation and prayer, which is to be out in nature in such a way that you completely surrender and let your sense of private self dissolve into an expanded sense that this whole ocean of energy, this whole ocean of beingness that is the universe, is at one with you. So you can take your pick on either of those ways of looking at it. I think most of us will find the first one that I described an earlier and better step. That's a little bit of an overreach to think that we can live in that state of oneness for most of us, that we can expand our awareness by some of these practices that Janine talks about and these Vision Quest experiences, immersing ourselves in nature, to the reality that there is life there, there is intelligence there, there is communication that's possible between me as a human being self and the tree self and so forth. So that's what I wanted to share in terms of the ideas. And I want to just guide a little bit of a meditation along the lines of what we did as a meditation last week to help bring it to a more experiential place. And then we'll have a little bit of time to have some group conversations. So take this moment to shift with me, if you would. Close your eyes. And of course, I know you're all indoors. I'm indoors. But if you close your eyes, to some extent in your mind, you can be aware of whatever you think of. And so just start. Always good to start by breathing consciously, being aware of breathing, being aware of the inhaling, the exhaling, the sensory experience of that. And the mind chatter, that's there, that's happening. Let it be. Don't try to make it stop. Just allow your attention to focus with your breath and be aware of that. Be aware of your body breathing. And your body is an organism of nature. The air that you breathe, that you're breathing in and breathing out, is part of the ocean of air that surrounds the material part of Mother Earth. The air itself is also a part of Mother Earth. So we're immersed in Mother Earth, we're immersed in her, and we're breathing her in and we're breathing her out. Allow yourself to get a sense of that, a feeling of that. We usually find ourselves thinking of the earth as below our feet. And indeed, there's that. Include now that your body is part of the body of the planet. Part of it. Made up of the same materials that exist in the earth. And the air, too, is a part of this being that we call Gaia, this being that we call Mother Earth. And we can very slowly, carefully open ourselves to that awareness. It's different than thinking it, different than it being just an idea. Allow your body to feel some sense of what that is, to be part of Mother Earth. And then if you bring into your mind, into your thoughts, the animals that are around where you live, where you are right now, under or all around or above your place. Birds, squirrels, deer, skunks, raccoons, whatever there is. And then expanding out, of course, those animals are part of, not separate from, the animal world. So excuse me, the easiest way to do this is to picture in your mind one or two of the animals that you are most sort of drawn to or feel connected to or feel are, some of you may have had experiences where you have guardian or animals, spirit animals. You think of them and then that sort of opens the door in consciousness to that, to their presence. You see there, and that relatedness that you have with them, it's part of your life. And then if you think in your mind of the plant realm, we sometimes call the kingdom, people prefer the word kingdom. Kingdom tells us that they are part of our family, part of our relations. Kingdom of the animals, kingdom of the plants, and there's myriads of kinds and species and of them. And you may want to, again, think of a particular kind of tree or a particular kind of flower or a particular kind of plant that we feel really close to or love, and that will tend to open the door to the consciousness of the feeling. What we're looking for is the feeling. And you may want to go down in your heart area, in your belly area, and allow this experience that we're exploring to be not just in your head. Now, people make a distinction between organic and inorganic, but in many lineages, that is really not a very significant difference in terms of the consciousness aspect of whatever is. So that Native Americans in sweat lodges bring in stone people. Mountains and soils, land itself is said to have consciousness, energy, and speaks to us, can speak to us. If we really are very, very, very fine-tuned sensitivity, which, for instance, I know for myself, I only have if I'm really, really focusing and wanting, sort of wanting to have that sensitivity, like calling on it, cultivating it. And again, being out there in it is a big help. But you can get a sense of it now. So this is you in relationship. You could think of it as all of these beings, animals, plants, mineral life, and humans as who you are. You are part of a web of interconnected livingness that has a focal point right where you are. That's one way that I have found to open to this sense of an ecological self. Don't forget to breathe consciously throughout all this. Breathe. The breath helps us. One very practical thing it does by consciously breathing, you stay more in an experiential mode and then getting drawn into the thinking mode. It's okay if you find yourself going into thoughts, but just come back. You can always come back. No judgment. So, okay. So you have, if you're with me on this, a kind of a sense of an expansion of the sense of the I that you are, and just bring your attention now back to the primary focus in your body. Notice your hands, notice your feet on the floor, and people have said when I do these breakouts to make a suggestion of what are you supposed to talk about. Um, uh, See if you can speak to this experience of expanding your sense of self to an ecological, what I'm calling an ecological self, this expanded sense of relationship to life all around you, and how that is for you. Okay, I'm going to do this. Okay, here we go. Boom.
Is that
Okay.
the mothership? Is that
So
like the
I think
What did you ask?
I think everybody is back. I'm not, yeah. So
Hi, thanks.
I wanted to give time for any of you who wanted to share a thought about any of this or that came up in the small group, or if you have a question that came up about any of the things I've said, you can just unmute and speak.
Well, I think we're all still unmuted, so that's makes it easy, right?
You're muted.
No,
Can you hear me asking you a question?
I can.
Oh, yes, go ahead.
Oh, well, that
Oh,
was.
I thought you were saying you couldn't hear me. You couldn't hear me. Okay. So I really appreciated you brought up about things like the rocks and connecting with that because plants feel easy. They're breathing. You know, that I've trained myself or had a lot of wonderful experiences connecting with and relationship with. So I really appreciate that because I could think about in my backyard these rocks that stick up and about being with them in a relationship way.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. You know, people know often that crystals, you think of crystals as
Exactly.
having a
Yeah.
lot of energy, a lot of power, can do healing work with them and so forth.
Yeah.
But they're just an ordinary stone. And in some shamanic teachings, I've seen people do what's called a divination using a stone. You
Ah,
have the intention to ask the earth a question, and then you go on a little walk, you meander around, you find a stone that just sort of lights up, or you somehow drawn to it, and you pick it up and you look at it, and the patterns in the stone seem to speak to you in relationship to your question.
yeah.
But again, it has to be done with intention and attention, like really paying attention to what it is, respectfully. Yeah,
And then you put it back on the ground.
somebody, and then you bring it back. Yeah, that's
Or
right.
you bring it back home.
Well, it it varies how you want to do it. Just you ask for guidance on how to do it respectfully. So some people always think that they should actually put it back right where it was. Or if you're going to put it in your home, I wouldn't just stick it in a drawer. I'd put it on an altar or someplace where it was honored, as something that was a teacher for you and could be again. Other thoughts and comments and questions? Oh, enjoying the silence.
If
Okay.
I can share a thought, Alan.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful topic tonight, very rich. And I was very interested in your kind of division into two versions, a more accessible version of connection in terms of identity and identification, and then the less accessible mystical union, the unio mystica. And ever the philosopher, I think it would be very good at some point, there isn't time tonight, to look more closely at the way we understand identification and what's involved. Because I think there's lots of questions about that and what that really means. Same thing for unio mystica, the union, but it's very interesting to consider those as sort of two departments of this kind of
Being.
way of being. Yeah.
No, that's a really, I'm glad you bring it back to that. I mean, if you think of relationship, again, like a marriage or lovers, deep friendship, there's an awareness and caring, and there's almost like an identity. You and me, we're in this together. We're like partners. We're identified in a sense with each other. And then there may be moments of such deep connection, such deep intimacy and connection, that the feeling itself is that there's no you and then me. There's just there's the one being that is. And even in a very, very close relationship, that may only last for one part of a period of time, and then there's the deep, the loving connectedness that still seems like there's a you and there's a me. But yes, you're right that we don't have time to go into it too far. It is a big part of the profundity of spiritual exploration, and so I'll have to leave it at that. And I like to keep respectful of the time that we have. So let's just close by taking a couple of deep, full, conscious breaths. I like the prayerful statement that comes from one of the Buddhist traditions. May all beings be safe. May all beings be happy. All beings be happy. May all beings be free. And I wish that for you and ourselves. I dedicate this work always to ourselves, those who show up, and all living beings on planet Earth. Blessings to you all. Thank you for coming. Always a joy.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Alan.
Shalom.